Hey, stick around until the end of today's episode for a very special offer. I'm your host, Bhavika, and welcome to this episode of the It's a Vibe podcast. Thanks for being here. I believe that life is always giving you signs, whether you notice them or not. So if you're distracted and you're not necessarily present in the moment, you could be missing these signs and not have a clue that they were coming your way. But something happens when you start shifting into the moment and you're there in the now. You start to notice certain things, and things begin to come a lot more clear, and they feel good. They feel right. And so when I had that big epiphany moment, that self-realization or spiritual awakening, whatever you want to call it or whatever you believe in, the moment that my life changed, when everything shifted for me and I was able to see clearly because I experienced something. When I look back at that moment, I realized that I was guided to that. Something led me to that. Something greater than myself connected all those dots for me and took me to that special moment. Especially when I look back and see the sequence of events that happened, I know something was essentially taking me there. And that's exactly what was meant to happen. And kind of like the pieces fell into place for me. And I attribute that to simply the fact that I was paying attention to life. I was noticing life. I was there in the moment and picking up on things that were coming up into my awareness. I wasn't necessarily distracted all the time or in my head overthinking things or going into the past or looking into the future. I was present. I was in the now, and I was practicing being aware of every moment that I could. And what that led to was me noticing specific things that were popping up in my life. And at that time it were certain words that I kept seeing everywhere throughout my day. And what started to happen is, naturally, I just became curious about it. And there's something special that happens when you start to follow your curiosity. And essentially what it feels like, it's like this inner guidance system, your intuition, telling you and leading you and guiding you to things. And when I did that, I was able to have that massive self-realization, that big epiphany moment that changed my entire life. And I connected to something deeper within me in a profound way. And that's the whole reason why I'm doing what I'm doing today, is to help people also achieve and find those moments in their life by becoming more self-aware and learning how to pay attention to life, not just mindlessly going through it on autopilot. But when you start to notice things and start to pick up on things, and you develop this curiosity and you're quieting your ego mind and listening more to your intuitive side, and you're following that, it feels good, it feels right. When you're following that good feeling, good things start to happen to you. And that's exactly what happened to me. After I had that experience, my entire world changed. And something I want to talk about today that I noticed was that something shifted inside of me, and it felt like something happened in my brain. Like I was able to start learning things like I'd never learned them before. I just started consuming content. It genuinely felt like my brain was a sponge. And what was shocking to me was that I was able to actually retain the information. I was remembering what I learned, what I read, days, weeks, months after. Like it was sticking like never before. And I believe that's because when you're really paying attention, it's like a whole body, whole mind focus, a whole being focus. Like you're right there in that moment. Whatever you're reading, you're fully invested into what you're reading. Whatever you're learning, you're fully invested into that. When you do that, when you're present and also you enjoy it, like you're curious about it and it's interesting to you, that's when things stick. That's when you remember things, and that's when they make the biggest impact and difference in your life. And so a good example of this is school. Do a lot of us remember what we learned in school, or have most of us forgotten it? If you think back all those years you were in school, do you remember all those things you learned? And when you think about the school's environment, most of the time we're distracted by like our friends, or we're fidgeting, or nowadays like on your phone or the internet, social media. You're not fully present, you're not fully there, so it's harder for you to actually retain that information and remember it, especially in the long term. And so long-term memory is just information plus emotion. I learned that from Jim Quick. And so when you're invested in something and interested in something, you're more likely to remember it. And I'm sure many of you can relate to not necessarily remembering everything that you learned in school. So then when I started learning after that big epiphany moment, after I started to actually follow my curiosity and learn things, it felt different. It felt like I was more engaged, and it felt like I moved into like a state of flow where everything was just kind of at ease and coming to me, and I started becoming obsessed with that feeling and obsessed with learning, especially learning about what had happened to me and all the other aspects of what that moment was really like. And so at the time, I used Instagram a lot as a tool to learn more about this. You'd think it would be Google or going on YouTube, which definitely has its resources, but there was a lot that I found through Instagram, and that was just me going through different accounts and following different people and things, and genuinely being more curious about it, and that leading me to the next thing and the next thing. And so what I found was that so many accounts posted content about this, about self and about life, and talking about how to become the awareness and consciousness. And I was so curious about it and just blown away by the experience I had that I became obsessed, and I wanted to learn more and more about what had happened to me and how I can help other people have similar experiences, and just more about the experience as a whole. And something new that I found that I really enjoy learning about, that I never really thought about before or was interested in before, was philosophy. It felt like I finally understood what the purpose of philosophy was and how it can help in life. Whereas before I would kind of just brush it off as some subject in school or some old people with some cool quotes. And so now, after I had that moment and I started seeing much more of what philosophy is and what it means and how it can be helpful, I started noticing so many accounts that were posting philosophy concepts and quotes, these amazing life quotes, and I started to fall in love with it. And if you follow me on Instagram, you might have noticed how much I love posting quotes too. That's kind of where the idea came from. I genuinely love a good quote. And so I started discovering people, philosophers that I had never even knew existed or ever heard about before. And somebody in my early phases of starting It's a Vibe, and moments after I had that kind of awakening moment, someone that really started to get my attention was the philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche. And so I kept seeing his quotes everywhere on my Instagram all the time. And I would save a lot of them because they were really good. They were amazing. So Friedrich Nietzsche really stood out to me at that time. But of course, like, I didn't really think anything of it. I just thought that this person's work and their teachings are cool, and I like these quotes, so I'm going to save them, and hopefully one day I'll be able to share them with the world. And so when I started noticing that it was him that kept popping up, I started to get a lot more curious about learning more about him and his teachings and his work. So one evening, I went onto YouTube and I typed in his name, and I saw this video made by School of Life. Maybe you've seen that account on YouTube. They're pretty awesome. The School of Life, they posted a video about Friedrich Nietzsche, and I thought, okay, cool. Like, let me watch it. I obviously enjoy a lot of his quotes, so I want to learn more about him. And so I started watching it, and it was really interesting. And so at the time, I was working as a supply teacher, a substitute teacher. So essentially on my school board, I get called into all these different schools in my area, and I travel to them, and I essentially teach for a day at that school. And then the next day I get called to another school. I went to a lot of schools in my area. And so that night, after I watched that Friedrich Nietzsche video, I got called into this school that I genuinely love going to. I'd been there so many times. The kids are great. the school is great, the area is great, and they have this really cool downtown Main Street area with like a lot of like nice restaurants and cafes and stores, and it's really nice to like just walk down. And so usually on my breaks, I would drive down there and I grab coffee or lunch or just kind of just hang out and take a break. And I genuinely loved going to this school because of that area as well, knowing that I could go there on my breaks. But the best part about that area was that they had this beautiful trail right next to the main street. And I would park my car. They had a little parking lot there. I would park my car there, and I would just spend some time walking up and down the trail and just being outside on nice days. And so I really enjoyed getting called into that school because of that. And so that area is just so pretty. It's like surrounded by trees. There's water flowing and you can walk along the water. So it was generally something that I would always look forward to going, and especially when I had some time off during the day. And I'd been to this school and this trail many times. So at this point, again, it's nothing new, but I was just excited to go back. And so that day, I went to school and then I had my break. So then I drove down to that little area. I parked my car and I started to walk towards the trail. And as I'm walking towards the trail, I noticed that there's this big sign at the start of the trail. And I'd never noticed that sign before. Obviously, I had walked past it a bunch of times, but I never really stopped and looked at it and noticed. And so that day, I walked up to that sign and I read it, and it said, "All truly great thoughts are conceived while walking." And I thought, what an amazing quote. I loved it so much, and it's so true to me. I absolutely love walking. You can ask anyone that knows me. If I could walk somewhere instead of drive, I'm walking. And I was always that friend that voted to walk to the store, to the restaurant, to the bar. Like, that was me. And now, even today, I go for so many walks throughout the week, and hiking is actually one of my favorite activities to do. And so it's so true to me. I always have so many amazing ideas when I'm just walking. And I usually pause and write them all down in my notes on my phone. And especially after I had that big aha moment, ideas just would flow to me when I walked. So I thought, what a beautiful sign and a wonderful quote to put in front of this trail. All truly great thoughts are conceived while walking. And so right away, I pulled out my phone and I wrote down that quote in my notes and just kept walking. I didn't think anything of it, just kept walking down the trail. And then eventually, of course, I had to go back to work. And so I went back to school, finished off the day. And then hours later, I come home and I'm just relaxing. I'm sitting on my couch and I'm strolling through Instagram. And all of a sudden, it hit me and I remembered, oh yeah, that quote I saw earlier on that day. On the trail, on that big sign. And I couldn't really think of it word for word, so I went back into my notes and I read the quote. But I realized that on the sign, it didn't say who said the quote. So I decided to Google the quote to find the author of the quote, and of course, it was Friedrich Nietzsche. Like, come on, like, what are the chances of that? After my awakening, I kept seeing his quotes all over the place. I didn't even know who he was. And then as I started seeing more and more, I got more and more curious of him. And then the night before I get called into that school, I watch a YouTube video of him. And again, I didn't know at all who that person was. I just had a bunch of his quotes saved, and I really liked what he had to say. Then on top of that, I had been to that trail so many times. And I've been called into that school so many times. And just by chance, that day, for the first time ever, I noticed that sign. And I saw the sign and I wrote down that quote. And I checked who said it later. And I could have got called into any school. There's so many different schools on my board. So what are the chances that those sequence of events led to that? And as soon as I saw his name, it was like that little magical feeling again. It wasn't necessarily as profound as that awakening moment, but it's that little like glimmer of some sort of magic, something mystical, something like cool, like wow, like what a coincidence. It makes you feel good. It's like a little burst of energy. And so I genuinely believe that life is literally always giving you signs. I saw that sign, and it led me to that moment, and it reminds me that I'm on the right path. Like something is happening here, and something is trying to tell me something. It's like that inner guidance, like you're doing okay, you're on the right path. And honestly, life is really always giving us signs like this if you have the eyes to see them, if you're in the state to notice them. So the key is to become aware, self-aware, and just start paying attention to your life in the moment. Become the observer. Notice what's going on around you. Be fully present in that moment. Be fully there wherever you are. I could have just walked by that sign once again. I could have been on my phone, I could have been distracted, or I could have just decided to sit in an old dusty classroom instead of even going outside and spending nature in the first place on my break. And again, when I read his name, the moment I read his name, it was just like a tiny magical moment. It felt amazing, like wow, like how crazy. Like, you know that feeling? Maybe that's happened to you. It's just like this meaningful, incredible coincidence. And when you experience those little mystical moments like that, it's a way of knowing you're right where you need to be. And it feels that way. That's the key. It's not just a knowing, it's a feeling. It's an experience that you have. And that's essentially your emotional guidance system, your inner knowing, your intuition speaking to you, encouraging you, sending you something to help you know that you're okay and more than okay. You're on the right track and everything's going to be fine. And so I live for these moments. I love them. I call them my universe stories. They had such inspiration and almost whimsical meaning in my life in places I wouldn't have necessarily thought to have found those type of moments. And genuinely, that's kind of what life is about. It's always trying to make the most of each situation, and most importantly, you're paying attention to those situations. You're fully there wherever you are. You're being present. You're noticing what's around you, tuning into life in the now. The only place that life exists, and the only time those magical, mystical moments start to happen to you. And when you do that, life will always give you signs to let you know, and you will have the eyes to see them. You'll have the awareness to notice them, and then you actually genuinely start to believe the universe has your back, and that keeps you going. It keeps you driven. It keeps you excited. It keeps you elated, like happy that things are working out exactly the way that they're meant to, and you are right where you need to be. And so if you've ever experienced moments like this, maybe you have your own little universe stories, I'm sure you do, you must know exactly what I'm talking about. They're the things that you just can't make up, and they feel amazing once you experience them. And so finally, if you want to have your own moments like this and create more moments like this for yourself, the key is to really focus on being present and notice what is going on around you and within you. And then follow your curiosity towards those things. Anything that makes you curious, go in that direction. Follow the things that feel good, that feel right, and go that way. And just know that is you going on your path. And life will give you a sign so that it confirms that you are on the right path and you're exactly where you need to be. And just stay aware and present so that you can actually notice it. And really, that's it. That is one of my favorite stories to share of how life is literally always giving you a sign. And so I really hope you enjoyed this episode, because I really enjoy and love sharing stories like this because they're real and they're authentic, and hopefully it makes you feel like that it can happen to you at any moment, and that these things are happening to us all the time. You just have to put yourself in a situation to notice them, and that is becoming present and aware. I really believe that at all moments of your life, you're just one epiphany away from an idea or a thought or a moment that completely changes your life forever. And it can happen in an instant, just like that. It can happen at any time, anywhere, in any present moment. And that is the only place that will happen. So stay aware, and I promise you, those moments will find you. And so I want to end on a quote that says, eventually you'll stop calling them coincidences and realize how powerful you really are. You are creating those moments for yourself and you're attracting them to you. They're not just coincidence, they're meant to happen to show you that you're exactly where you need to be. So just keep going. Thanks so much for listening, everyone. I appreciate you being here. And before you go, I made a special free resource guide to help you become more conscious in your life so that you can notice these moments and these opportunities that come up. And that is the 5 levels of awareness. And so I created this document to help bring your awareness towards problems and solutions in your life so that you can see what level of awareness you have in order to become more solution oriented. When you become more solution oriented, you're focusing more on the good. When you start focusing more on the good, that's when good things start to come your way. And that's when you move into a more of a flow state where you're learning and growing. And then that's the state where these moments start to find you. And you start having these meaningful coincidences and synchronicities and you start to feel good. So if you're interested, go and grab your free resource guide at www.itsavibe.ca/awareness levels and find out what level of awareness you have towards being more solution oriented in your life so that you can create more of these mystical and magical moments in your experience. And so hopefully this helps. If you're interested, I also put the link in the description of this podcast, or you can go directly to www.itsavibe.ca/awareness levels. I really hope you enjoy this resource and that it makes a difference in your life since it's made such a big impact in mine. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. I appreciate you being here. Thanks for listening to the It's a Vibe podcast. Please like, subscribe, and share this with anyone that you think would enjoy this episode. I appreciate you all. Peace and love, and see you next time. Thanks.